Discover what happens when you break a Sagittarius heart. What truly happens when a Sagittarius heart breaks? Most people think you'll hear it through anger, confrontation, loud exits, or restless escapes. But no, not when it's real. Not when it's sacred. Because when a Sagittarius breaks from the core, it doesn't sound like thunder. Sounds like silence. A silence so honest, so soul deep, it echoes through time. You see, dear Sagittarius, your silence is never cowardice. It is a sacred ritual of preservation. When you retreat, it's not to escape the pain. It's to protect what's left of your spirit from being trampled. You don't just leave. You vanish inward, not as an act of war, but as a quiet farewell to a part of you that once believed love was enough. And for those who have ever lost a Sagittarius, they did not simply lose a person. They lost a dimension of raw truth and wild freedom. They lost someone who once looked at them like the future was still worth believing in. Today, we will walk through the soul of a Sagittarius when heartbreak arrives. Not the surface pain, but the deeper ritual. The retreat, the silence, the rebirth. And if you've ever been the one to disappear without a word, not out of anger, but out of unbearable sorrow, this message is for you. I'm Sophia. This is Zodiac Wisdom. If this resonates with your soul, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe, because someone else might need to remember that their fire is still sacred, even after it's been dimmed. Gate 1. They didn't walk away because they stopped loving. They walked away because they loved too much. When a Sagittarius heart is broken, it doesn't shatter into pieces for all the world to see. It cracks inward like a star imploding in its own light. Quietly, powerfully, invisibly. And those around may never notice until it's far too late. That's the first sacred truth about this fire sign. Their leaving is not born from rage. It's born from reverence, for what once was, and for the self they can no longer betray. Sagittarius is the sign of expansion, of optimism, of the deep soul-searching kind of faith that keeps rising even after the storm has passed. So when a Sagittarius loves, it's never halfway. They dive in, boldly, sincerely. They don't build walls. They open gates. And in doing so, they offer you more than affection. They offer you a vision of the future, a shared dream, a burning belief that the two of you are capable of something real, something lasting. But here's what people often forget. Behind that joy, that laughter, that brave heart, there is a soul deeply vulnerable. Not in the way that seeks attention, but in the way that gives completely. A Sagittarius who chooses you doesn't just give you love. They give you access to their sacred fire. Their hope, their honesty, their trust in life. And that trust, when broken, doesn't turn into anger. It turns into distance. A deep, echoing, permanent distance. They don't stop loving you when things start to fall apart. In fact, that's when they love you harder. They try to hold the pieces together, often in silence. They rationalize your coldness. They absorb your contradictions. They excuse your absence, telling themselves, maybe they're just tired. Or, maybe they didn't mean it. They forgive things that make their chest ache. They justify the emotional gaps with spiritual patience. Because Sagittarius doesn't leave the moment it hurts. They stay. They believe. They endure. But here's the moment that changes everything. It doesn't come with a fight. It doesn't come with yelling or accusations. It comes in the quiet. It arrives like a final sunrise in a place they know they can no longer call home. And in that moment, just 1 second of painful clarity, they realize. If they keep pouring from their heart, they will disappear from themselves. They will burn out the very light they were born to protect. And so they stop. Not because they want to, but because the cost of staying has become too high. And when a Sagittarius chooses to leave, it's never impulsive. It's the most conscious decision they've ever made. It's not the end of love. It's the preservation of self. There are no dramatic speeches. No need for closure. The person who once stayed up late trying to understand you now goes to bed without needing an answer. The one who used to send you little messages just to brighten your day simply goes silent. The light in their eyes doesn't flicker, it turns inward. Like a fire being pulled back to its source. Not extinguished but hidden. Protected. And that's when you realize they're gone. Not physically, perhaps. They may still share the same space, offer the same smile. But their soul has pulled away. Their trust, once offered so freely, has become a memory. A beautiful, distant memory. You see, Sagittarius doesn't leave because they stopped caring. They leave because they finally understood something sacred. That staying in a love where they must abandon themselves is no longer love. It's spiritual erasure. And they didn't come into this world to vanish for someone else's comfort. In the teachings of Buddhism, there is a concept of right effort, the spiritual discernment to know when to persist and when to release. And that's exactly what happens in the heart of a broken Sagittarius. They realize that their effort has turned into self-neglect, that their compassion has turned into compromise, that their loyalty has become a leash. And so they do the bravest thing. They choose themselves. Not because they've given up on love, but because they've remembered what real love must include: self-respect, freedom, truth. It's not easy for them. No matter how strong they seem, no matter how philosophical they sound, behind every Sagittarius who walks away is a heart that once begged the stars to make it work. A heart that tried to forgive, tried to wait, tried to believe in potential. And it hurts. Deeply. But Sagittarius doesn't wear that hurt. They transmute it. They turn it into silence, into reflection, into distance that becomes wisdom. They don't leave so they can punish you. They leave so they can begin again with themselves, to reclaim the parts of their soul that started dimming in your shadow, to return to the lightness they once knew before they started shrinking to make you feel bigger. And here's what most people don't realize until it's too late. When a Sagittarius stops chasing, they never resume. When they stop explaining, it's not to provoke you. It's because they've made peace with never being understood by someone unwilling to meet them halfway. When they leave, they're not waiting for you to come after them. They're already walking toward the version of themselves they nearly lost in your presence. Yes, they once believed in your future together. Yes, they once saw a life beside you. But Sagittarius doesn't cling to what no longer feels alive. They release it even if it breaks their heart. Because they understand something most don't. That you cannot create a future with someone who only values you when you're quiet, convenient, or invisible. Have you ever seen someone smiling, laughing, working, yet you felt something had disappeared behind their eyes? That's the mark of a Sagittarius who's already left emotionally. They didn't slam the door. They didn't make a scene. But they're gone. And they won't come back. Not as the version you once knew. That version is sacred now. That version is being guarded. And maybe, just maybe, you were the one who had a Sagittarius by your side and you didn't realize what a miracle that was. Maybe you took for granted the way they always believed in you. The way they forgave what others would never tolerate. The way they made you laugh even when they were quietly breaking inside. If so, I invite you not to feel shame but reverence. Because if a Sagittarius ever gave you their whole heart, you were trusted by one of the most sincere souls to walk this earth. And if they walked away, it's because they loved you enough to stay true to themselves when staying with you became a betrayal of their own light. And if you, dear Sagittarius, are reading this and nodding, if you've ever quietly disappeared not out of pride but out of deep sacred exhaustion, then know this: you are not weak. You are not cold. You are not heartless. You are the fire that chose to protect itself. You are the truth that chose not to keep pretending. You are the soul that chose to remember its worth. And that is the beginning of everything. Gate 2. They don't retaliate. They rise in silence and with sacred precision. When someone breaks a Sagittarius heart, there's often an expectation of a confrontation, a monologue, an explosion of truth so sharp it cuts everyone in the room. But no, that is not what happens when the wound is real. When it's soul deep, what actually happens is far quieter and far more powerful. They rise, not in rebellion but in stillness, not in rage but in self-honor. You see, Sagittarius doesn't seek revenge. Their spirit doesn't work that way. When someone harms them deeply, they don't plot or punish. They simply stop explaining. They stop offering their heart in small pieces just so someone else can feel whole. And without warning, without drama, they detach. Not because they've stopped feeling, but because they've started remembering who they were before the pain. To love a Sagittarius is to hold a wildfire in your hands. It is warmth, freedom, laughter, and truth all rolled into one sacred flame. But once you misuse that flame, once you mock their vulnerability or dismiss their trust, you'll see something rare. Not rage, not tantrums, but absence. They disappear, not physically perhaps, but energetically. And nothing is colder than the warmth that used to surround you, now pulled back with sacred precision. They won't scream. They won't beg. They won't demand that you notice what you've done. Because Sagittarius knows that begging for understanding is not love. It is self-abandonment. And they've done that before. Too many times. So instead of trying to be heard, they begin to listen again. Not to you, but to themselves. And what they hear is this: you don't belong here anymore. That's the moment they choose to leave emotionally. That's the moment the soul lifts from the connection and begins to soar back toward itself. They still smile. They still check in. They still respond with grace. But the tether is gone. And with it, the access to the most sacred parts of who they are. And you will feel it, not immediately but eventually. Like waking up in a house that used to feel like home, only to realize it's hollow now. The light is still there, but it no longer warms you. The laughter is still heard, but it no longer reaches your heart. Because what you're feeling is not absence. It's the presence of someone who has retrieved their spirit. Sagittarius doesn't retreat to be chased. They retreat to protect what was nearly lost inside of them. And when they're gone, they don't sit and wait for you to notice. They evolve. They invest in themselves again. They return to their fire, their vision, their future. They begin to breathe fully, sleep deeply, and laugh without second-guessing. They start to live again. And that's what shocks people most. Not the leaving, but the peace that follows. You thought they'd be shattered. But Sagittarius was never fragile. They were simply loyal. And once that loyalty is retracted, it becomes an impenetrable shield. Not made of bitterness, but made of self-trust. In ancient teachings, it is said that the warrior who wins the greatest battles is the one who chooses not to fight when the cost is their own soul. That is the Sagittarius. They do not waste time proving their pain. They use their energy to rebuild their path. They will not send you paragraphs explaining your failure. They will not stalk your life for closure. They will not publicly mourn what they have already buried within. And if you try to return, you may find the gates closed. Not out of spite, but because the place where they once held space for you has now become a sanctuary for their healing. And not everyone is permitted to enter again. Perhaps you were the one who thought they would always be there. After all, they were the one who cheered for you when no one else did. Who forgave you when even you couldn't forgive yourself. Who believed in your light when your own hands were shaking with doubt. And maybe you never said thank you. Maybe you thought they didn't need it. Until the day you felt the absence of that unwavering warmth. That fierce gentleness. That grounding love that made you feel seen without asking. And now the silence. It's not aggressive. It's not strategic. It's sacred. It is the sound of a soul choosing itself. Sagittarius doesn't announce when they've moved on. They simply do. And the proof isn't in their words. It's in their presence. You'll see it in the way they no longer flinch when they hear your name. In the way they speak of the past without bitterness. In the way they hold themselves taller, calmer, more whole. Have you ever stood in front of someone who once adored you and realized you no longer live in their eyes? That is what it's like to lose a Sagittarius who has healed. They will not ask you to explain. They will not seek validation. They will not need to be understood. Because they have found something far more valuable than your apology. They have found themselves again. And if you are the Sagittarius who once disappeared, not to manipulate but to survive, this is your affirmation. You did the right thing. You chose your soul over suffering. Your silence was not a retreat. It was a return. Your absence was not a punishment. It was a protection. And anyone who could not see the beauty in your boundaries was never meant to stay. Your fire was never meant to keep others warm while you froze inside. Your voice was never meant to be silenced so someone else could feel comfortable. And your love was never meant to be watered down, so it wouldn't overwhelm someone who wasn't ready for its truth. So stand tall, Sagittarius. Not with arrogance but with clarity, with sacred dignity, with the quiet confidence of a soul who knows, they may not have understood me, but I understand myself. And that is enough. Let the world think you vanished. Let them wonder. You owe no one an explanation for your healing. You are the wind that does not ask permission before it shifts. You are the arrow that flies forward without needing to apologize for not circling back. You are the flame that rises, not to destroy, but to illuminate the truth others were too afraid to face. And if they ever try to return, remember this: your love is a temple. Not everyone gets to walk barefoot on holy ground twice. Gate 3. When they return, Sagittarius is no longer the same. They've reborn in silence. There's something sacred about the return of someone who once broke your heart. And yet, what most people never expect is this. When you return to a Sagittarius, you do not return to the same soul. You return to someone who has walked through fire silently and come out on the other side not burned but purified. You may knock on the same door, but the home behind it has changed. The lights are different. The furniture rearranged. The air is quieter. The one you once knew, who laughed easily and forgave even faster, who held on through storms without asking why, is no longer waiting at the window. They're not holding their breath. They're not wondering where you went. They already know. And more importantly, they know where they're going now. Sagittarius is a sign of transformation through motion. Even in pain they move. Even in heartbreak they seek meaning. They may disappear for a while, but they're never lost. Because deep within them is an unshakable compass. Their truth. And that truth is what guides them back, not to you but to themselves. They don't rise to make you regret. They don't heal so you'll see what you lost. They do it because something in their soul whispers, "We don't belong in this pain anymore." And they listen. When they return, they do not need you. That is the first thing you will notice. The second, they still care. But it's different now. Softer, wiser, quieter. It's the kind of caring that no longer makes room for chaos. It's the kind that smiles but does not chase. That hears your apologies but no longer hopes for change. It is the love of someone who once gave everything and has since learned to give only to what can hold them with care. You see, the old Sagittarius might have welcomed you back with open arms, tears in their eyes, voice trembling with longing. They might have tried to explain all the hurt, just so you could understand what you never saw. They would have tried one more time to bridge the distance with their truth. But not this Sagittarius, because now they know. If someone didn't understand them when they were standing there, raw and real, no amount of explanation will change that. They've made peace with not being understood by those who chose not to listen when it mattered most. So when they look at you now, it's not with the desperation of someone who needs to be chosen. It's with the calm acceptance of someone who has already chosen themselves. This is the moment you realize you didn't just lose a lover. You lost someone sacred. Someone who once held space for your imperfections, who tried to love you through your silence, who carried the weight of unspoken apologies. And now, that space no longer exists, not out of cruelty, but because it's been filled with their own voice, their own needs, their own fire. They still smile at you, still wish you peace, but their eyes no longer search yours for answers. Their laughter no longer curves around your presence. They may still be kind, but the thread that once connected your heart to theirs, it's been cut with grace. And what breaks your heart now is not the loss of love. It's the realization that they no longer need it to feel whole. Have you ever seen someone return after heartbreak with a glow you didn't help create? That's the Sagittarius. They've lit their own way forward. They've built themselves up in the silence you left them in. And now you are witnessing a resurrection. Not the return of the person you left, but the birth of someone who survived you. In spiritual teachings, there is a moment called the awakening. It is when the soul no longer sees life through the eyes of its pain, but through the clarity that pain offered. Sagittarius has reached that moment. They no longer respond from the wound. They respond from the wisdom. They will not shame you. They will not list your failures. But they also will not hand over their light so easily again. Because now they understand what it took to rebuild it. And if you're hoping to come back into their life, hoping to pick up where you left off, there's something you must know. They are no longer living in that chapter. And that chapter is no longer available to you. Because Sagittarius doesn't just leave people behind. They leave versions of themselves behind. The version who tolerated neglect. The one who romanticized pain. The one who stayed too long hoping love could teach someone how to see. That Sagittarius is gone. Buried with the nights they cried alone. Buried with the mornings they woke up pretending everything was okay. Buried with the pages of journals that held every word they never got to say. Now what remains is someone whole. Someone luminous. Someone soft but no longer bendable. Someone open but no longer waiting. If you try to return, they will greet you with grace. But you will feel the distance. Not the kind that comes from bitterness, but the kind that comes from clarity. The kind that says, I've tasted my own peace, and I will not give it up for a second chance at something that broke me. And if you're the Sagittarius who has returned to yourself, let me speak directly to your spirit now. Thank you. Thank you for not letting the silence turn you cold. Thank you for not letting the pain convince you that love was a lie. Thank you for rising, not in anger but in light. You've done what few can. You've walked away with your integrity intact. You've healed without demanding closure. You've remembered your fire. And instead of using it to burn bridges, you've used it to illuminate your path. That is power. That is sacred. And now, no matter who returns, you know what you carry. You carry truth. You carry wisdom. You carry freedom. And no one, not even the ones you once loved, can take that from you again. Let them return if they must. But remember, you don't owe your presence to anyone who couldn't hold your soul when it was trembling. You don't owe your forgiveness to someone who confused your fire for a flare. And you don't owe your story to someone who never tried to read your heart when it was wide open. You owe yourself everything now. Your peace, your joy, your future. And this time, Sagittarius, you will not forget what it cost you to come home to yourself. Gate 4. You didn't just lose a person. You lost a universe you may never enter again. There is a moment after the heartbreak, after the silence, after the healing, when the one who once walked away begins to be remembered not with frustration or blame, but with awe. That's when it finally sinks in. You didn't just lose a person. You lost something sacred. You lost a force of nature, a world unto itself. You lost a Sagittarius. And what's most haunting is the fact that they left so quietly, so gently, that you almost didn't realize until the emptiness arrived. Until the echo of their laughter stopped ringing in your life. Until the quiet acts of love they gave without asking, remembered birthdays, little messages of hope, soft encouragements in your darkest hours, ceased. And then one day, in a conversation or a memory, you whispered to yourself, "They're really gone." But Sagittarius doesn't just go. They expand away from you. They rise. They evolve. They outgrow the pain that once tethered them to your orbit. And when they leave, they don't leave to wound. They leave because they finally understood what the silence was trying to teach them all along. You cannot keep giving your light to someone who only offers you their shadow. The absence of a Sagittarius isn't just the loss of a companion. It's the absence of inspiration, of unshakable honesty, of belief in your highest potential. Because that's what they gave you, not just affection but vision. They saw you not only as you were but as you could become. And they loved you for both, until you made them feel invisible. And now you may find yourself in the presence of people who laugh louder, talk smoother, shine brighter, and still none of them feel like home. Because Sagittarius was never just a person. They were a compass, a torch, a myth, a mirror. They held your hand when your spirit was lost. They forgave what you never had the courage to confess. They stayed long after they should have left. And when they finally walked away, they didn't say goodbye to punish you. They said goodbye to save the last flicker of their flame. The truth is, Sagittarius doesn't love like others. Their love is wild, not untamed but uncontainable. Their love is woven with laughter, wonder, and a dangerous kind of loyalty. Dangerous because once you have it, you think it will never leave. And once it's gone, you realize there is no one else who will ever love you that way again. Have you ever stood in a room full of people, yet felt lonelier than you did when they were in your life? That is the echo of losing a Sagittarius. Because what you're grieving is not just their presence. You're grieving the way you were seen through their eyes. You're grieving the way you believed in yourself when they stood beside you. You're grieving the way they made you want to be better, not because they demanded it but because they deserved it. In spiritual traditions, there is a word for this kind of loss: a sacred departure. It is when someone leaves not in bitterness, but with blessing. And that's exactly what Sagittarius does. They don't close doors. They dissolve them. They don't curse your name. They pray you find what you could not see when they stood before you. But here's the part that hurts the most. Sagittarius rarely returns. Not because they hold grudges, but because they carry memory. They remember what it felt like to give and be overlooked, to stay and be silenced, to love and be met with indifference. And once they've learned that lesson, their soul doesn't allow them to relearn it. So even if you see them again, even if they smile at you the same way, even if for a moment you think maybe Maybe the door is still open, it's not. You are now a chapter in their book. A closed one. Not crossed out, not resented, but no longer accessible. And if you are the Sagittarius reading this, let me tell you something you may still be afraid to believe. You did not leave too soon. You did not love too much. You did not fail because they couldn't see you. You chose to protect the universe within you. The dreams, the fire, the laughter, the wild hope. You chose to protect what makes you you. And that is not selfish. That is sacred. Some people come into this life to teach others how to survive. Sagittarius, you came to teach people how to live. And sometimes, in doing so, you lose yourself. You pour too much. You stay too long. You carry too much weight that isn't yours to carry. And then you rise. You retreat. You re-enter yourself. That is your resurrection. And those who lose you, they don't just lose your companionship. They lose the chance to be truly seen, to be truly challenged, to be loved in a way that makes them want to love themselves more. They may go on, they may replace you in name and body, but never in soul. Because the Sagittarius soul is unrepeatable. You are the last fire they will ever burn in that way. And no one else will ever reflect them back to themselves with such fierce, unapologetic truth. So to those who once broke a Sagittarius heart, let this be your mirror. Not a punishment, not a curse, but an invitation to become the person who deserved to stay. And if you find in the silence that the door has truly closed, know this. They didn't leave because they didn't love you. They left because they finally remembered they were born to fly. And no one, not even you, was worth clipping their wings. Conclusion. Dear Sagittarius, if you've made it here, I want you to close your eyes and place a gentle hand over your heart. This isn't the heart that broke when they left. This isn't the heart that once stayed too long in a place that dimmed your light. This is the heart that survived, that remembered, that came back to life. What happens when someone breaks a Sagittarius heart isn't destruction. It's revelation, a sacred unveiling of your strength, your truth, and your power to rise. Not just once, but again and again, each time brighter, each time closer to your soul's original fire. You didn't walk away in anger. You walked away in wisdom. You didn't retaliate. You rebirthed. You didn't disappear. You returned to yourself. And for those who once thought you'd always stay, they now realize the rare miracle they lost. Not a partner, not a presence, but a universe. A sacred sanctuary of honesty, faith, and expansion that only a Sagittarius can offer. So if this story echoed something inside you, if it stirred a memory, a truth, a quiet knowing, I ask you to share this with someone who needs it. Like, comment, and subscribe, not out of habit, but because someone out there may be one heartbeat away from remembering their worth. Thank you for being brave enough to love the way you do. Thank you for being strong enough to walk away. And thank you for being the light that others remember, long after they've lost their way. You were never meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to awaken something eternal in those who were ready.